What happens when one of America's most beloved media moguls goes head-to-head with late-night television's sharpest tongue? You won't believe what unfolds when Oprah Winfrey sits down with Stephen Colbert for what was supposed to be a routine promotional interview that turned into an absolute train wreck of epic proportions. The collision of two media titans last night left audiences stunned, social media exploding, and the entertainment industry questioning everything they thought they knew about professional conduct. Before we get into this incredible story, make sure you hit that subscribe button and drop a comment below, because you're not going to believe what unfolds when these two powerhouses clash in the most shocking late-night television moment of the year. The Ed Sullivan Theater buzzed with anticipation as audience members settled into their seats for what promised to be another memorable episode of The Late Show. Behind the scenes, production assistants scurried about making final preparations, while Stephen Colbert reviewed his notes one last time in his dressing room. Tonight's guest was none other than Oprah Winfrey, the queen of media herself, scheduled to discuss her latest philanthropic ventures and upcoming projects. As the familiar opening music began to play and the audience erupted in applause, Colbert emerged from behind his desk with his trademark grin plastered across his face. The energy in the room was electric, with fans knowing they were about to witness television royalty grace the stage. Little did they know they were about to witness something far more explosive than anyone could have anticipated. "Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the incomparable Oprah Winfrey," Colbert announced with theatrical enthusiasm as the audience rose to their feet in thunderous applause. Oprah emerged from backstage, radiant as always in an elegant burgundy blazer, her smile beaming as she waved to the adoring crowd. The audience's love for her was palpable, their cheers echoing through the theater as she made her way across the stage. She embraced Colbert with what appeared to be genuine warmth before settling into the guest chair, the picture of grace and composure. "Oprah, welcome back to the show," Colbert began, his voice carrying that familiar mix of charm and underlying edge that regular viewers had come to expect. "It's always a pleasure to have you here, especially when there's so much happening in your world." "Thank you, Stephen. It's wonderful to be here," Oprah replied, her voice carrying that unmistakable warmth that had endeared her to millions over the decades. "Your audience is just incredible, and I have to say, the energy in this room tonight is something special." The first few minutes proceeded exactly as expected. Colbert asked about her latest book club selection, and Oprah spoke eloquently about the power of literature to transform lives. The conversation flowed naturally as they discussed her various media ventures and charitable initiatives. To the untrained eye, everything seemed perfectly normal, but those who knew Colbert's interview style could sense something brewing beneath the surface. "You know, Oprah," Colbert said, leaning back in his chair with a slight smirk, "I've always admired how you've built this incredible empire of positivity and inspiration. But I have to ask, doesn't it ever feel a bit manufactured? This constant message of, you get a dream, and you get a dream, everybody gets a dream, when the reality for most people is quite different?" The question hung in the air like a loaded weapon. Oprah's smile faltered for just a fraction of a second, but she quickly recovered, though something had shifted in her demeanor. The audience, initially oblivious to the tension, began to sense that something was different about this particular exchange. "Stephen, I think what you're calling manufactured, I call authentic hope," Oprah responded, her voice maintaining its composure, but with a slight edge creeping in. "When I share stories of transformation and possibility, I'm sharing real experiences from real people who have overcome real challenges." But Colbert wasn't finished. He pressed forward with the kind of relentless questioning that had made him famous, but tonight there was something more personal, more targeted about his approach. What had started as professional skepticism was beginning to feel like something much more deliberate and pointed, setting the stage for what would become one of the most uncomfortable confrontations in late-night television history. "Let's talk about your media empire for a moment," Colbert continued, his tone shifting noticeably as he leaned forward in his chair. "You've made billions telling people they can achieve anything if they just believe hard enough. But isn't that a bit irresponsible? Selling false hope to people who are struggling with real systemic issues that positive thinking alone can't solve." The audience began to shift uncomfortably in their seats. This wasn't the light-hearted banter they had come to expect from celebrity interviews. Oprah's posture straightened, and for the first time since sitting down, her media-trained composure showed cracks. "Stephen, I think you're mischaracterizing what I do," Oprah replied, her voice taking on a firmer tone. "I don't sell false hope. I share stories of real people who have overcome real obstacles. I've never claimed that positive thinking alone solves everything, but I do believe in the power of human resilience and determination." "But that's exactly my point," Colbert shot back, his famous smirk becoming more pronounced. "You profit from people's desperation. Your book club, your network, your magazine. It's all built on this idea that if people just buy into your brand of inspiration, their lives will magically improve. Meanwhile, you're sitting in your mansion worth hundreds of millions while your followers are still struggling to pay their bills." The tension in the studio became almost suffocating. Camera operators began zooming in tighter on both faces, capturing every micro-expression as this interview took an unprecedented turn. Oprah's hands, which had been gesturing naturally throughout the conversation, now gripped the arms of her chair. "That is completely unfair. And frankly, Stephen, it's beneath you," Oprah responded, her voice rising slightly. "My success doesn't diminish the value of the message I share. I've used my platform to highlight important social issues, to give voice to the voiceless, and yes, to inspire people to believe in themselves. If that's a crime, then I'm guilty as charged." Colbert's eyes gleamed with the kind of predatory satisfaction that came from knowing he had struck a nerve. The audience was now completely silent, sensing they were witnessing something unprecedented unfold before their eyes. "But let's be honest about what you really do," Colbert pressed on, his voice dripping with barely concealed disdain. "You've commodified spirituality and packaged hope as a consumer product. Your audience doesn't need another self-help guru. They need healthcare, affordable housing, and living wages. But instead of using your influence to push for real systemic change, you sell them books and tell them to visualize their way out of poverty." The words hit Oprah like physical blows. Her composure, carefully maintained through decades of media training, began to crumble as something darker and more personal seemed to be driving Colbert's relentless attack. What had started as pointed journalism was quickly transforming into something that felt almost vindictive, as if old grievances were finally being aired in the most public way possible. "You know what, Stephen?" Oprah said, her voice now carrying a steel edge that few had ever heard from her before. "I came here tonight as a courtesy to support your show, and this is how you repay that gesture? With personal attacks disguised as journalism?" The audience was now completely silent, the uncomfortable energy in the room thick enough to cut with a knife. Production assistants in the wings exchanged worried glances, unsure whether they should intervene or let this unprecedented moment play out on live television. "Personal attacks?" Colbert laughed, a harsh sound that seemed to echo through the stunned theater. "I'm asking legitimate questions about your business practices. If you can't handle that level of scrutiny, maybe you shouldn't be positioning yourself as some kind of moral authority." "Moral authority?" Oprah's voice rose sharply, her carefully maintained media persona finally cracking wide open. "Stephen, I have spent my entire career lifting people up, giving them hope when they had none, providing platforms for important conversations about race, trauma, and healing. What have you done besides make jokes and tear people down from behind your desk?" The accusation hung in the air like a poison cloud. Colbert's smirk faltered for just a moment before returning with even more venom than before. The gloves were officially off, and what had begun as an uncomfortable interview was now a full-scale verbal warfare between two media titans. "At least I'm honest about what I do," Colbert fired back, his voice rising to match hers. "I don't pretend to be some kind of saint while building a billion-dollar empire off other people's pain and desperation. I don't exploit trauma for ratings, or profit from people's need to believe in something better." "Exploit trauma?" Oprah stood up abruptly from her chair, her burgundy blazer flowing as she faced Colbert directly. "How dare you? I have given survivors a voice, I have brought important issues to light, and I have used my platform to create real change in this world. You sit here night after night making jokes about real problems instead of actually trying to solve them." The audience was frozen in shock, some members pulling out their phones to record what they were witnessing. Camera operators continued filming, capturing every moment of this extraordinary breakdown in professional decorum. The production team seemed paralyzed, unsure how to handle a situation that was spiraling completely out of control. "Real change?" Colbert laughed again, standing up to meet her challenge. "You mean like when you promoted pseudoscience and gave platforms to quacks and charlatans? You mean like when you helped spread dangerous misinformation that actually hurt people? That's your idea of real change?" "That is enough!" Oprah's voice boomed through the theater with a power that seemed to shake the very foundations of the building. "I have sat here and listened to your attacks, your condescension, and your complete lack of respect. But I will not stand here and let you rewrite history to suit your narrative." The confrontation had reached a fever pitch that nobody in the audience or watching at home could have possibly anticipated. What was supposed to be a routine promotional appearance had transformed into the most explosive television moment in recent memory, with two of media's most powerful figures locked in a battle that seemed to transcend professional boundaries and venture into deeply personal territory that neither seemed willing or able to back down from. "You want to talk about rewriting history?" Colbert's voice cut through the stunned silence like a blade. "Let's talk about how you've systematically avoided taking responsibility for the damage you've caused. Remember when you gave Jenny McCarthy a platform to spread anti-vaccine conspiracy theories? How many children suffered because parents trusted your judgment over actual medical professionals?" The accusation hit like a thunderbolt. Oprah's face flushed with a mixture of anger and something that looked almost like shame. The audience gasped audibly, finally understanding that this wasn't just professional sparring. This was personal warfare between two people who clearly had deep-seated grievances against each other. "That is a gross mischaracterization of what happened," Oprah shot back, her voice trembling with rage. "I have always encouraged people to seek multiple perspectives and make informed decisions. If you're going to hold me responsible for every guest who ever appeared on my show, then what about your responsibility for the divisive rhetoric you spread every single night?" "Divisive rhetoric?" Colbert's laugh was bitter and cold. "I'm a comedian, Oprah. I tell jokes about politicians and current events. You positioned yourself as a spiritual leader, a trusted advisor to millions of people. The power dynamic isn't even comparable, and you know it. Don't you dare lecture me about power dynamics." Oprah's voice rose to a near shout. "You've used your platform to mock and belittle people for years, hiding behind the excuse of comedy when it's convenient. At least I've tried to use my influence to help people even if I've made mistakes along the way." The tension in the studio had become almost unbearable. Audience members were visibly uncomfortable, some looking toward the exits as if considering whether they should leave. The production crew remained frozen, unsure whether to cut to commercial or let this unprecedented moment continue to unfold. "Help people?" Colbert's voice dripped with sarcasm. "You mean like when you gave Dr. Oz a platform to peddle his medical misinformation to vulnerable audiences? Or when you promoted Suzanne Summers and her dangerous hormone replacement theories? How many people trusted you over their actual doctors and paid the price?" "Stop it," Oprah said, her voice now carrying a warning tone that everyone in the theater could feel. "You're crossing lines that shouldn't be crossed, Stephen. This isn't journalism anymore. This is character assassination. Character assassination? Colbert stepped closer, his voice rising to match her intensity. I'm holding you accountable. For your actions. Something the media has been too afraid to do for decades because of your power and influence. Well, I'm not afraid of you, Oprah. The words hung in the air like a challenge thrown down in an ancient duel. The audience held its collective breath as these two titans of media faced off, in what had become the most uncomfortable and explosive confrontation in late-night television history. You know what your real problem is, Stephen? Oprah's voice had dropped to a dangerous whisper that somehow carried more menace than her previous shouting. You're jealous. You're jealous that I built something meaningful while you've spent your career hiding behind sarcasm and cynicism. You tear others down because you've never had the courage to actually build something up. The accusation hit Colbert like a physical blow, and for the first time since this confrontation began, his composure cracked completely. His face flushed red with anger, and something in his eyes suggested that Oprah had just crossed a line that there would be no coming back from. Jealous? Colbert's voice was now a roar that echoed through the stunned theater. You think I'm jealous of someone who built their empire on the backs of people suffering? You think I'm jealous of someone who profits from false hope while real problems go unsolved? You're delusional, Oprah. The words seemed to reverberate through the studio like gunshots. The audience was now visibly distressed, with several people covering their mouths in shock. This had gone far beyond uncomfortable. Television. This was the complete destruction of professional decorum on live national television. That's it, Oprah said, her voice cutting through the chaos with deadly calm. I'm done with this circus. She began removing her microphone with sharp, deliberate movements, her hands shaking with barely controlled fury. 30 years I've been in this business, and I have never ever been treated with such disrespect and unprofessionalism. Don't walk away from this, Colbert called out, his voice now desperate as he seemed to realize that this confrontation had spiraled completely out of his control. You can't just leave when someone finally calls you out on your... Watch me, Oprah interrupted, turning to face him one final time. Her eyes blazed with an intensity that seemed to silence even Colbert's relentless tongue. You want to know what real courage looks like, Stephen. It's knowing when to walk away from toxicity. It's refusing to participate in someone else's need to tear others down to feel better about themselves. She dropped her microphone onto the guest chair with a resounding thud that echoed through the now silent studio. The sound seemed to punctuate the end of what had been the most explosive confrontation in late-night television history. Ladies and gentlemen, Oprah addressed the stunned audience directly, her voice regaining some of its familiar warmth despite the circumstances. I apologize that you had to witness this display. You deserve better, and frankly, so do I. Without another word, she turned and began walking toward the backstage exit, her burgundy blazer flowing behind her like a cape. The audience watched in stunned silence as one of the most powerful figures in media history made her dramatic exit from what was supposed to be a routine promotional appearance. Colbert stood frozen behind his desk, seemingly paralyzed by the realization of what had just occurred. The cameras continued rolling, capturing his shocked expression as the full weight of the situation began to dawn on him. The studio fell into an eerie silence broken only by the sound of Oprah's heels clicking against the floor as she disappeared into the backstage darkness. As the heavy backstage door closed behind her with a definitive bang, the audience remained in stunned silence. Several moments passed before scattered, uncertain applause began to ripple through the theater. Not for the show, but in apparent support of Oprah's dignified exit from an impossible situation. Colbert finally found his voice, attempting to regain control of his program, but the damage was done. We'll be right back after these messages, he managed to say, his usual confidence completely shattered. The confrontation that had started as pointed journalism had devolved into something ugly and personal, leaving both participants damaged and the audience traumatized. Within hours, social media would explode with clips of the confrontation, leading to widespread condemnation of Colbert's conduct and calls for accountability. The incident would mark a turning point, not just for his show, but for the entire landscape of late-night television, proving that even the most seasoned professionals could cross lines that should never be crossed, and that sometimes the most powerful response is simply refusing to participate in someone else's destructive behavior.